Thank you, Anne. Hello, folks. So, as Anne says, I work for CITiZAN, the Coastal and Intertidal Zone Archaeology Network, up until 9 days ago. I now work for Coasts in Mind, which I'm not going to talk to you about because we don't have any results for it yet. But invite me back in 2.5 years' time, and I'll tell you all about coastal impact and how members of the public are helping to do that. So, CITiZAN is the Coastal and Intertidal Zone Archaeological Network. We are a community archaeology project teaching members of the public how to identify and record coastal archaeology. Our data set originally covered mean low water to 100 meters inland, but then rapidly expanded outside of that area because there's just too many interesting things to record. And we covered everything on the foreshore that you could possibly see, from mammoth tusks at the very top there on the left. That's a 6 foot, 2 meter long mammoth tusk, 1.5 kilometers out into the foreshore zone in Mersey Island. Far too big and fragile for us to cover and bring back. So that's been done with a 3D model. And then we go all the way up to Cold War, post-medieval modern archaeology. That's the best preserved set of Second World War defences that you will see in the country. That's in North Yorkshire at Formby, at Bridlington, and there's plenty of boats as well. So this on your right is the Minesweeper MMS 113 in Gosport. If you sign up to Peter's boat recording, that's one of the vessels that you might be getting to do some recording work on. The data set for CITiZAN contains almost 28,000 records for shipwrecks and hulks and downed aircraft. So there are plenty of boaty bits in amongst all of the concrete and mammoth tusks. We were very much inspired by the Thames Discovery Programme, who was one of MOLA's Intertidal Archaeology projects, and SCAPE, based up in Scotland at St Andrews University, and Arvadir, who is the Welsh Community Archaeology project of sort of 2003 to 2010. In our first phase of funding, we had 3 offices based out of York, London and Portsmouth, based with Mark and Peter down in Fort Cumberland. I worked out of the York office, so we covered everything from the Wash up to the Scottish border, and then from the Scottish border down to the Welsh border. In our second phase, we split into 6 areas: Liverpool Bay, Humber, where I'm mostly going to be talking about today, Mersey Island, the South Kent coast, Solent harbours in the South Devon rivers. And the idea was that in the first phase of the project, we had identified the areas of particular interest and areas that we wanted to concentrate on more. And so in the second phase, we refocused our information and our attention, and were able to give people more time on the foreshore. Our primary recording tool, which you can still download for your Android and your Apple phones, is a mobile phone app. The screenshot on the right-hand side is the top of the Humber Estuary. Each of those little yellow dots is an information point, which has all of the information on the site. There are almost 82,000 features on there that you can have a look at, and our volunteers added 2,000 features to the data set as they went through, and that's 6,000 images. When you click on one of those little dots, you get a huge quantity of information. So you get a brief description about what it is, periods, photographs of it, and all of this information is editable by members of the public and members of staff. So this is a hulk out of Cleethorpes. So one of the vessels that has been recorded as we've been doing some work on the Humber Estuary. The interactive map on the website looks like this. This is where you can search all of the information. It is searchable by monument type, period, and height above sea level. So if you're interested in how many wrecks are above the mean low water, you can look at that. It's a heat map, so all of the red hotspots indicate where the most archaeology is found. So we're up here, just below Newcastle, with this lovely red dot. You can see several blue areas. This is where there are low amounts of intertidal information. Not necessarily because we don't have volunteers working in those areas, but because some of that information is very difficult to get at, so you probably don't want to be playing around in intertidal zone in the wash too much. But up in Cumbria, that's just because we don't have a huge quantity of volunteers up there, and so there's a huge amount of archaeology to go and have a look at. So if you would like to do something positive and it's too rough to dive and you want to get your wellies on and you're in the intertidal zone, do go and have a look, especially if you're up in Cumbria, and you can find some more interesting archaeology for us to look at. All of the archaeology has also gone onto the ADS. That's the Archaeological Data Service. It is the benchmark depository for digital archaeology in the UK. So you can also search all of those 6,000 images on there and download them. So if you want a photograph of a particularly nice wreck for your presentation or something like that, you can download it from there. So the Humber Estuary is in the east coast, flows out into the North Sea. You have on the top Yorkshire, and then on the bottom Lincolnshire. I'm mostly going to be talking about three areas: the North Ferriby Peat Shelf, the Victoria Docks in Hull, and the Wonderland Peat Shelf down in Cleethorpes. As we heard earlier, from a maritime archaeological perspective, the Humber Estuary is perhaps best known for its prehistoric vessels. They are the oldest known vessels in the United Kingdom. They are amongst the oldest vessels in Europe. The Egyptian vessels are probably the only known big boats that are older than the North Ferriby boats. So there are 4 boats in North Ferriby, a Brigg boat, which is called the Brigg Raft, but it's not really a raft, it's just a boat which has been completely flattened. So just a reminder that when you see boats on the foreshore and they fall over like that, that doesn't necessarily mean that's how they came. And then the Kilnsey boat. The Kilnsey boat is controversial. We were hearing today earlier that there are no boats of this type with sails. The finder of the Kilnsey boat, Robert van der Noort, solidly believes that the Kilnsey boat had a sail to it. He's possibly one of the few people who only thinks that. The sail step for it is about the size of a matchbox, so it wouldn't have been a very efficient sail, but it is possible that it had a sail. So the North Ferriby peat shelf is not a very nice place to go and play. It has a raw sewage outlet that pushes everything and anything onto it. But our volunteer John in the red coat bravely battled all of that stuff because he was obsessed with finding another Ferriby boat. There are 4 of them found between 1937 and 1986. The first one is about 16 meters long. The last one is just a teeny tiny little cleat about the size of a shoebox. Unfortunately, John, battling all his poo, didn't find a boat. He did, however, record the slow destruction of the peat shelf as it fell into the river. So these white blobs that you can see up here, these are the remains of prehistoric tree stumps. There's an older oak and lime forest at North Ferriby. They date to the early Bronze Age, so they're about 1170 BC, plus or minus 105 years. There is about 100 meters of foreshore here, and it's about 2 meters deep of interwoven marine clay and peat shelf. As you go further up the Humber, this is Cleethorpes. The peat shelf at Cleethorpes gets much bigger. You're looking at around 100. You're looking at around 1 kilometre of foreshore at Cleethorpes compared to around the 100 metres at North Ferriby. And it has a substantial peat shelf with numerous collapsed trees on it and tree stumps. So the largest trees there are about 3 to 4 metres in size. The majority of them have all fallen in one direction to the south, suggesting that they probably fell over as the tide level rose and the root systems rotted out and they fell onto their sides. There are a couple which fall in a slightly different direction, and you can take your pick as to whether you think they were deliberately felled or whether you think trees fall over in a random way, depending on the way the wind blows. There is at least one tree which has a series of axe marks on it, so that probably was felled by human intervention, but the majority of them are almost certainly naturally felled trees, because why would you go to the effort of felling a tree with a bronze axe and then just leave it there? It's a lot of work and a lot of potential resource which you're just abandoning on the foreshore. The environmental analysis from the peat shelf suggests that it was a dense oak woodland when the peat was laid down, so it is a slightly different environment to the one you find at the North Ferriby foreshore. Slightly denser, probably slightly less water in it as the peat was starting to form. The peat surface is really interesting from a boaty viewpoint. In the late 18th, early 19th century, there was a huge boat breaking industry in Cleethorpes. This is the remains of a rudder, which hopefully most of you can recognise as such. As you pootle around the peat shelf out there, you will see 7 to 8 wrecks, Kilsons, and you'll see all sorts of little bits and pieces of broken boat, frames, spreads of nails, this rudder, all sorts of various bits and pieces. And basically, the estuary mud is extremely slippy out there, not very deep, but very slippy. And so the people who were breaking grounded the vessels on the peat shelf deliberately, because that gave them a nice solid area to work across. In the 1950s, there was a real habit of turning pieces of the submerged forest into stuff. So on the bottom, on the left-hand side, this slightly scary-looking gentleman is making crucifixes out of the submerged forest and using it as an example of Noah's Great Flood. I'm not quite sure what that says about his understanding of intertidal archaeology and geology in the 1950s, but he was adamant that those of us that believed in the end of the Ice Age were sinners, and he was going to save our souls with intertidal wood crucifixes. In 1952, this on the right here, this slightly grainy photograph, is the mayor of Sheffield and Cleethorpes and their respective wives, and about 100 people who came down onto the foreshore to saw a 2 foot by 1 foot plank out of one of these trees and turn it into a plaque to dedicate the relationship between Sheffield and Cleethorpes. Cleethorpes was the stock town for Sheffield, so when everybody went on holiday from all the mills, they all came down to Cleethorpes and spent their holidays on the beach down there, and they thought it would be a nice way to commemorate that relationship. At the same time, they hauled a 3-metre section of tree out of the foreshore and strapped it to the side of a public loo. Don't quite know what that says about what they thought about Sheffield, but they decided that a submerged tree would be a good thing to show off their relationship. In 1958, the Queen Elizabeth and Prince Philip, that's on the very top at the left, came down to Cleethorpes, and they were given a turned box made out of the wood as well, which was described as a 3,000-year-old oak box. Earlier in the tour, Grimsby had given the Queen a recreation of an 800-year-old sword. Cleethorpes and Grimsby have a historical angry relationship with each other, and the councillors of Cleethorpes thought, well, if you're going to give them an 800-year-old sword, we'll give you something just a little bit older and just show off a little bit more. The photograph that follows on from the mares on the foreshore is the mayoress being carried off the foreshore because she's decided to wear her kitten heels into the mud. This is just a quick reminder that if you're out onto the foreshore, leave your kitten heels to the pub afterwards. Welly boots only, please. In the 1980s, this gentleman and his fine tash, which I'm only slightly jealous of, was digging for bait on the peat shelf, and he came across this beautiful stone axe hammer, which was hafted, had a complete haft on it. That's pretty rare for these sort of things. He couldn't fit it into his box, he couldn't fit it into his bucket with his haft on it, so he snapped the haft off, put the head into the bucket, and merrily took it off to the museum and said, I found this thing. It had this wooden stuff on it. I threw it away. Luckily, in the haft hole, there was the remains of the haft, and so they were able to C14 date it, and it C14 dates to about 1400 BC, so the latish Bronze Age, and is slightly older than the peat shelf that it was deposited into. Whether it was ritual deposition or accidental loss, that's a question we've been talking about this morning, and I'm going to leave it to more intelligent people to decide which is the right answer to that. What we do know is that in roughly the same area, there is a small wooden structure that we excavated in 2016. So this dates to roughly the same period that the axe came from. So it's the air period where the water was rising as the ice sheets melted, and you would have little islands of dry land and little islands of slightly boggy material, and wooden trackways and platforms moving you between the areas. So it's all natural wood, apart from this one on the end, number 103, which is half cut. So someone's used some wedges to cut them in half to give you a nice flat platform. So did the person who owned the stone axe drop it as they were walking along this platform? Was it ritually deposited off the platform? We don't know. It's possible that this was a dock and they were using the boats to move backwards and forwards over the Humber, possibly moving things around. What we do know is that they have some cattle backwards and forwards. So this is one of my colleagues, Meg. She's pointing at some aurochs hooves. So aurochs are prehistoric cattle. They're about 6 foot tall at the shoulder, and they moved around backwards and forwards on the foreshore. So they're the ancestors of modern cows. And we know that around similar wooden structures in the Netherlands, that there are modern or contemporary cow footprints. So perhaps moving cows backwards and forwards over these wooden structures so that you don't get your cows lost in the bog like this auroch got lost here. That's about 6,000 years old, this peat shelf. So it's like a sort of diagonal slice of cake, and the closer you go up the foreshore, the more modern the peat shelves go. The closer you get to the tidal edge, the older the peat shelves go. So this is right at the very top. The sort of late Bronze Age Neolithic peat shelf that I was talking about slightly earlier is in the middle of the peat shelf. And if you go further out to that 1.5 kilometre point, you start getting the paleo stuff knocking around as well. We're now going to jump sort of 2,000 years, 3,000 years into the future and look at one of the largest shipbuilding industries on the Humber. So by the time we get to the 18th and 19th century, Hull had become quite a large shipbuilding site and had a huge fleet of about 400 sailing ships that used to go out and fish off the Dogger Bank. Used to run into regular trouble with the Russians. Things don't change. And had a big whaling fleet and a big fleet moving vessels backwards and forwards. And this is Earl's Shipyard. Earl's Shipyard is the second largest boat builder in Hull at the time, and it's the only boatyard which still has a little bit of it surviving. So this is from around 1888, 1890. Earls were instigated in 1853 when they launched their first vessel onto Victoria Dock. They started 7 years earlier as a maker of ships' engines and ship's boilers. So this is what the site looked like in 1888 once they moved onto the Humber. They were originally slightly further up, launching into Victoria Docks, but they had a huge fire at that point, and they were able to rent actually foreshore territory, which meant that they could launch straight into the Humber, which gave them a huge advantage over their competitors because they could launch bigger vessels and they could launch vessels much faster. By 1930, 1932, during the Great Depression, Shipbuilding across the UK was in the doldrums, and the government nationalised everything and closed a large number of the shipbuilding yards down. This was one of the ones that was closed down as part of the liquidation process for British shipping and shipbuilding, and almost everything was sold off, including this giant fitting out crane. This is a 100-ton crane. It's one of the largest cranes in the country at the time, and was boxed up and shipped over to Kowloon docks and built up in Hong Kong, and then was only demolished in the late 1980s. So it had quite a history as it bashed backwards and forwards around the world. This is the area now. Very little of the dock infrastructure still survives. This is where Victoria Docks is, or was, this big housing estate down here. It was filled in the 1980s when they needed to have more housing in Hull. The only bits of the dock infrastructure that still survive are the half-tide basin here and the tidal entry. The half-tide basin is now completely full of water. When it was excavated and they were building the housing estate, it had 25 feet of mud in it. So it had built up quite a lot of sticky, smelly mud whilst it was closed. There are still some signs of the old shipyard knocking around. This is the remains of the tidal basin. This is the remains of the Victorian foreshore, and this is the remains of the full tide dock. So there are still little bits and pieces of that Victorian shipbuilder left on the foreshore. Some of our volunteers went out and recorded the foreshore. When they built the area, they poured a large load of iron slag across it to consolidate the foreshore, to make it nice and easy to move around in and provide a solid base for the ship's cradles that support the vessels as they're being built. So this is what the area looks like. On the left-hand side, you can see a series of timbers which the keels of the vessels would have rested on, and then there are a series of large wooden posts which would have held the hulls of the ships coming up. And on the right-hand side, you can see the plan of the shipyard as it was built in the early 1900s. This is the remainder of the Victorian foreshore. The concrete foreshore was built up behind it because this is a fairly broken part of the foreshore, and they needed to secure it much more strongly. We're recording this by drone because it turns out that it gets extremely muddy as you go round that. I know that because I lost my favourite pair of welly boots. Luckily, we had a big strapping volunteer with us, so I was able to reenact the Lady Mayoress of Sheffield's rescue from the foreshore, and he threw me over his shoulder and he carried me back again. So this is just a reminder to not be an idiot and don't go out too far into the foreshore, especially if you don't have a strapping volunteer called Alex to carry you backwards and forwards. The shipyard made about 700 ships across the 80 years of its construction. This is the Japanese vessel, the Congo, which was launched in 1877. It is one of the first 3 vessels which was built for the Japanese Navy once the US forcibly opened it up. The Earls also built the boiler for her sister ship, the Hay. Apologies for my appalling Japanese pronunciation. The only vessel which is still in service, as far as we know, is the SS Atlanta. This is in Lake Titicaca, where she is a rentable boat for the Peru Rail Service. The Peru Rail Service at the time wanted to have some vessels on Lake Titicaca. They got Earls to build them. They were fully built on the Humber, strapped into crates, packed up, shipped across to Peru, donkeyed up to Lake Titicaca, and then there was a small team of guys from Earls who rebuilt everything on the shores of Lake Titicaca. She was built in 1930 and launched in 1932, so she's had quite a serious career floating around the lake. There are 3 Carville-built wooden vessels which survive on site at Earls. These are nothing to do with Earls Shipyard. They were abandoned there in the 1980s when the owner tried to force Hull City Council into looking after them for him, and they said no, and so he just left them there. They are known as Boat 1, Boat 2, and Boat 3 very handily. John Douglas, who is hiding up at the back somewhere, he did the very first recording of these vessels in 2000 with a community group. Boats 2 and 3 are Humber keels, so they're like the transit vans of the late 19th century. You would use them for everything. Boat 1 is probably slightly more slicker and is probably a sloop of some sort, but it's full of stuff, and the only really way we're going to find out is to dig it out, and that's just too much effort, and the council don't like that as an idea. So this is one of John's plans of the site. You can notice a piece of burning here. That's sad, but very important because it ties into why the boats are in such a state. Local kids used to set fire to this and time it as to how fast the fire brigade would come and put the vessels out. Not necessarily the smartest thing because it is stupidly wet, and so it didn't burn very well. But, you know, kids will be kids. Our volunteers. Come on, Mr. Button. Your laptop's died. Okay, well, sorry, you're just going to have a look at this slide. So our volunteers have been recording this since about 2015. As they go along, they have... we'll switch to the fancy pointer. As you go along, so our volunteers have been recording this since about 2015. This is the windlass that you might remember from John's plan, which sat in line with the keel, probably where it was left in place. It's now been picked up and moved by the river, completely out of position, and all of that lovely deck planking underneath the top of the captain's cabin, that's all completely gone. On the left, you have a photograph of the ladder down into the hold from John in 2000, and on the right, a slightly out of focus photograph of the same ladder in 2015 with all the rungs stripped out. You can see in John's photograph a load of bulkheads and cast iron knees, which are holding the hold in place. They've all completely gone now, unfortunately, so the boat is really starting to fall apart. You can see backwards and forwards the burning of various bits of the timber as people tried to set it on fire, very unsuccessfully. But incredibly, you still have little bits of the tin lining which should have sat inside the hold, keeping all of that liquid cargo like grain, etc., in place. The building of Green Dock Hull has caused real problems for the vessels. Since they put in a bucket load of concrete, the silting around the vessels has got much worse. In one way, that's good because it means that the little scroats can't come out and burn them. In another way, sorry, apologies for my French, I could see Mark going. But it does make life a bit more hard for us as archaeologists to get out there and record them. Whoa, it's completely died now. I don't know. It didn't like my French, which is probably a good idea. But it's fine.
It's showing a black slide. 41, 42. Is that 42?
That's 42.
Excellent.
Yeah. So MOLA's next steps on the foreshore. Sorry, I'm breaking everything. MOLA's next steps on the foreshore is a project called Coasts in Mind. We are looking at recording the impact of the climate catastrophe through recording people's own memories of the foreshore. So we're looking for people's personal archives, photographs, postcards, memories of the changing foreshore. We're working in 4 areas around the Kent coast, on Sefton, on North Devon around Appledore, and in Poole Harbour. So if you have any old photographs of those areas, old postcards of those areas, please do get in touch. And thank you very much. Hopefully I haven't broken it for the next presenter.
Any other questions?
You mentioned at the beginning students encouraged to sort of whatever by worship for their projects. Is there any plans to do any work in Wales?
We would love to do some work in Wales. We had volunteers who used the app to record archaeology in Wales. That caused our funder, the NLHF, slight kittens, because they only fund projects in England, and they tend to get in trouble when they stray across the Severn. So we got into trouble. But the short answer is yes, we'd love to. It's just a question of finding funders. So CADU, the Royal Commission, anybody who's here from CADU and the Royal Commission, and they want to come and talk to us about coming and doing some work with Ian in Wales, we'd love to do it.
Just relating to the coast in mind, next week's the 200th anniversary of the 1824 hurricane that came up.
Oh, yes, it is.
Dorset Coast just a little article about an animation about it with the Environment Agency as well.
Cool. I will hunt that out then. Thank you very much.
We just repeat that for the sake of the folks at home. So that's just information about the 1824 hurricane in relation to the Coasts in Mind project. Thank you for that.
Maybe more perspective with the question, but it seems that Coasts in Mind is now looking to talk to people who were once Scripps. Setting fire to boats.
Yeah, if you are a boat burner, I will quite happily talk to you. I might call you a scrope. Sorry about that.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Andy.